As the Taliban took over Kabul on August 15, 2021, the situation at Hamid Karzai International Airport quickly became the focus of international attention. The U.S. and its allies launched an emergency evacuation operation to rescue their citizens, embassy personnel, and thousands of Afghan allies, including interpreters, journalists, and human rights workers. The speed of the Taliban's advance had left little time for planning, and chaos unfolded as thousands of Afghans rushed to the airport in a desperate attempt to flee the country. Many had worked with U.S. forces and feared Taliban retaliation. The airport became overwhelmed, with runways flooded by civilians and evacuation flights delayed. Images of people clinging to departing aircraft and others crowding around military planes became iconic symbols of the crisis. The U.S. deployed additional troops to secure the perimeter and manage the evacuation, creating a tense standoff with Taliban fighters who now controlled the city's entrances and checkpoints. Despite a fragile understanding between the two sides, the environment remained dangerous and unpredictable. On August 26th, a suicide bomber from ISIS-K carried out an attack at Abbey Gate, killing 13 U.S. service members and over 170 Afghan civilians. The bombing underscored the extreme risk of the evacuation and further intensified global scrutiny. In the midst of this, the U.S. and its allies conducted one of the largest airlifts in history, evacuating over 120,000 people in just over 2 weeks. Though many were rescued, thousands more were left behind, including those who had applied for special visas but couldn't reach the airport. The operation ended on August 30th, when the last U.S. military plane departed Kabul. The final hours were marked by darkness, silence, and a deep sense of uncertainty as a 20-year mission came to a close amid scenes of heartbreak and urgency. The U.S. withdrawal and the Taliban's return to power sparked a global wave of reactions, ranging from condemnation to cautious acknowledgement. Critics of the withdrawal pointed to the disorderly execution of the exit plan and the humanitarian crisis that followed. Leaders from both sides of the U.S. political spectrum questioned the lack of preparation for evacuations and the intelligence failure that underestimated the Taliban's capabilities. International allies, particularly NATO members who had also invested resources and lives in the Afghan mission, expressed frustration over the abrupt and unilateral nature of the U.S. decision. Many feared the loss of credibility and influence that the West could suffer on the world stage due to the chaotic exit. Human rights organizations raised alarms about the fate of Afghan women, minorities, and civil society members, all of whom faced renewed threats under Taliban rule. On the other hand, supporters of the withdrawal argued that staying longer would not have changed the outcome, and that the war had cost too many lives and resources over 2 decades. They emphasized that the Afghan government and military had been given ample support and time to build a stable system, and that it was never the U.S.'s role to nation-build indefinitely. Some global leaders took a neutral stance, choosing to engage diplomatically with the Taliban to ensure stability and prevent further conflict or refugee flows. Countries in the region like China, Russia, Pakistan, and Iran began recalibrating their foreign policies to adjust to the new power dynamics. In Afghanistan, the sudden shift in power raised urgent questions about global counterterrorism efforts, refugee protections, and long-term stability in South and Central Asia. The debate around the withdrawal remains deeply complex, shaped by decades of war, loss, and conflicting political priorities across the international community. The return of the Taliban to power in 2021 triggered deep concern among Afghan citizens, particularly women, minority groups, journalists, and those who had supported U.S. and NATO forces. For many Afghans, memories of the Taliban's rule in the 1990s brought fear of repression, harsh punishment, and loss of basic rights. Under the previous Taliban regime, women were banned from education, work, and public life, and harsh laws were enforced through violence and intimidation. After the 2001 U.S.-led invasion, Afghan society experienced significant, though fragile, progress. Women attended universities, worked in government and media, and participated in elections. A free press emerged, and young people began to express themselves openly through art, music, and digital platforms. That progress was suddenly threatened when the Taliban regained control. Although Taliban leaders initially promised a more moderate approach, reports from across the country revealed growing restrictions. In many areas, women were told to stay home unless escorted by a male guardian, girls' secondary schools were closed, and dress codes were reimposed. Fear of revenge attacks also spread, especially among former Afghan security forces, civil servants, and those who had worked with foreign militaries. Many went into hiding or attempted to flee. Journalists and activists faced intimidation, arrest, or worse, leading to a sharp decline in press freedom and public dissent. Ethnic and religious minorities, such as the Hazaras and Shia Muslims, feared renewed persecution. Economically, the country faced collapse as foreign aid and access to international banks were frozen, leading to widespread unemployment and hunger. Amid this uncertainty, millions of Afghans were left with limited choices: stay and endure the unknown or risk everything to escape. The Taliban's return reshaped daily life across Afghanistan, and its impact continues to evolve, affecting not just governance but the very identity and future of Afghan society. Imagine building something for 20 years, brick by brick, day by day, only to watch it fall in a matter of weeks. That's what happened in Afghanistan in 2021. It wasn't just the end of a war, it was the unraveling of hopes, promises, and lives in real time. Let's take a moment to understand what really happened when the U.S. left and the Taliban returned. In April 2021, President Joe Biden officially announced that the United States would begin a full withdrawal of its military forces from Afghanistan, with a final deadline set for August 31, 2021. This decision marked the end of America's longest-running war, which had begun nearly 2 decades earlier in response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. For many years, American troops had remained in Afghanistan, working to dismantle terrorist networks, train Afghan security forces, and support the Afghan government. Over time, the U.S. presence had decreased, but a complete exit had never been achieved. Biden's announcement was based on the belief that continued military involvement would not change the outcome, and that the U.S. needed to focus on future challenges, not past wars. This withdrawal decision was in line with the 2020 Doha Agreement, signed between the Trump administration and the Taliban, which outlined a path for U.S. departure in exchange for Taliban promises to prevent terrorism. While the goal was to end a costly and prolonged conflict, concerns quickly grew over the Afghan government's ability to stand on its own. Despite years of support, the Afghan military was still dependent on American logistics, intelligence, and air power. As the U.S. began drawing down its forces in the summer of 2021, the Taliban launched a rapid offensive, capturing city after city with little resistance. The speed of this takeover shocked international observers and led to a chaotic situation on the ground. The U.S. withdrawal timeline remained firm, despite these developments, as Biden maintained that extending the mission would not improve outcomes and might even worsen the crisis. The final days of the withdrawal were marked by a massive airlift operation to evacuate diplomats, citizens, and vulnerable Afghans, highlighting the dramatic and complex consequences of ending such a long war. The collapse of the Afghan government in 2021 was rapid and unexpected by many. For years, the United States and its allies had worked to build a functioning Afghan state, investing heavily in its military, police, and political institutions. Yet, beneath the surface, the government remained deeply fragile, riddled with corruption, poor leadership, and low morale among security forces. As the U.S. began its withdrawal, the Taliban intensified their campaign, moving swiftly across provinces. In many places, Afghan forces surrendered or retreated without significant fighting, revealing how reliant they had become on American support, especially for air power and logistics. The leadership at the top did little to inspire confidence. President Ashraf Ghani, who had been seen as a symbol of stability by some, failed to rally his military or build trust among local leaders. His government was often accused of favoring certain ethnic groups and sidelining key regional figures, creating divisions within the country's power structure. As the Taliban approached Kabul in mid-August, the collapse accelerated. Rather then organize a last defense or transition of power, President Ghani fled the country, reportedly taking large sums of money with him, though this has been disputed. His sudden departure created a vacuum of leadership, leaving officials, troops, and citizens in shock. Within hours of his exit, Taliban fighters entered Kabul and took control without resistance. This marked the complete fall of the U.S.-backed Afghan government. The scenes that followed showed desperation and disbelief. Government offices deserted, officials trying to flee, and Afghans scrambling to find safety. What had once been presented as a stable democracy backed by the international community unraveled almost overnight, exposing how little public confidence or institutional strength it truly had. This collapse reshaped the narrative of the 2-decade-long U.S. presence in Afghanistan and left lasting questions about its legacy. The Taliban's swift takeover of Afghanistan in 2021 stunned the world with its speed and efficiency. After the U.S. announced its final withdrawal, the Taliban launched a coordinated military campaign to seize territory, beginning in rural areas and quickly moving toward major cities. In a matter of weeks, they captured dozens of provincial capitals with little or no resistance. Afghan security forces, despite being trained and funded for years by international partners, either fled, surrendered, or negotiated local ceasefires. Morale among Afghan troops was low, partly due to inconsistent pay, lack of supplies, and deep frustration with government leadership. The Taliban, by contrast, appeared highly motivated and well-coordinated, using a mixture of military pressure and negotiations with local leaders to take control without heavy bloodshed in many places. Their approach focused on building momentum and psychological advantage, portraying themselves as inevitable victors. As one city after another fell, panic spread across the country. By the second week of August, the Taliban controlled nearly all major routes and had encircled Kabul, the capital. On August 15, 2021, Taliban fighters entered Kabul without facing resistance. The Afghan government had collapsed, President Ghani had fled, and the streets of the capital were filled with confusion. The Taliban quickly took control of key government buildings, security centers, and the presidential palace. The international community watched in disbelief as the group regained control nearly 20 years after being ousted in 2001. Their leaders gave press conferences, promising a new approach, but many Afghans feared a return to the repressive rule of the past. The rapid fall of Kabul became symbolic of the overall failure of 2 decades of foreign intervention, and the speed of the Taliban's victory highlighted how little resistance stood between them and full control once U.S. forces committed to leaving.